Hi, I'm Steve Plage. Welcome to this edition of Voices from the Village. Tonight we're going to be talking about a subject that really is on everyone's minds in Santa Cruz and across the country really, and that's affordable housing. I'm really pleased to have with me some folks who've been spending a lot of time, energy, and intellect in developing some alternatives, some options, some real creative ideas about how we can generate affordable housing here in Santa Cruz County. Welcome Bruce Van Allen. Welcome back to you.
Thanks, Steve.
Gretchen Regenhart, welcome.
Thank you.
And Tim Willoughby. Let's just go around and let our viewers know kind of who you are, just a little bit, and then how you became involved kind of in the issue generally of affordable housing. And then we'll talk about affordable housing now.
Well, I've been involved as a as a tenant organizer since the early 70s over the years, and that was actually what propelled me to the city council back in the late 70s. And if anything, the housing crisis, particularly for renters, has gotten worse over the years. And I've recently gotten involved again with Affordable Housing Now, which is a fairly new group. Yeah. Just trying to push and let the policymakers at the local level, state level, federal level know that there is a very severe crisis in affordability, again, particularly for renters, but really for everybody dealing with the cost of housing around here. And it's our county, it's our state, and it's our nation, and it's a crisis, and it has to be addressed, and they're not addressing it.
And of course, your experience speaks for itself. Mayor here in Santa Cruz in '82 and '83, and actually got some affordable housing built. Some say some of the last affordable housing. Gretchen Regenhart, welcome. Gretchen, you and I worked at Project Homeless Connect together, and are providing some legal service out there. You're the regional director for the California Rural Legal Assistance, so welcome. And tell the audience just a little bit about you and how you became involved in affordable housing as an issue.
Well, I work for California Rural Legal Assistance, which is the legal aid office for Santa Cruz County. I've been there for over 30 years, and really we've always focused on housing, but I think the issue has become so severe, so extreme now that we're trying to get together with any allies that we can find in the community to bring this issue really front and center.
Great. And Tim Willoughby, welcome. Tim, you and I just met before the show. We hadn't really spoken before. I enjoy your writing on the subject of affordable housing and, of course, all the other things you do in the community. Let people know a little bit about yourself and then how you got involved in the issue.
Well, I'm new to the area. Most of the other people on our committee have been residents for years and years, and I've only been here for 3 years. So my connection came through across the North County Democratic Club, which is one of the founders of the group. And so I got into it through that organization, and for me, it's just political. It's as a Democrat, that's what I believe in.
There you go.
So that's where it comes from.
Okay. And we were talking before the show. I suggested that people really were a little vague on what affordable housing actually means and what kind of income level is required to be able to qualify for that. And we came up with maybe just a couple of sentences about, to give people an idea, it serves as kind of a template a little bit.
Well, you know, affordable, there's a couple ways to look at it. One is that it's the sort of general usage is that housing ought to be affordable to the people that live and work in the community. And so that's a kind of a general idea. It's also kind of a bureaucratic jargon term for a specific thing under certain programs that fund affordable housing. And that's the standard these days is based on the median income of the community. What's called moderate income housing is up to 120% of the median, so a little bit above the median. What's called low-income housing is up to 80% of the median, and what's called very low-income housing is up to 60% of the median. And this is a typical standard that's used. A challenge in Santa Cruz County is that because we have so many high-paid people moving here from over the hill, the median income is rising quite rapidly, even though there are still a lot of people in Santa Cruz, in the city and in the county, who have jobs that don't pay anywhere near that median income. The median income is something in the, did we have a number, 45,000?
That sounds about right.
Something like that. It might even be higher than that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher than that. So,
it's a little easier to understand if you personalize it.
Okay.
And you think
Please
about
do.
And you think about actual people. So, you know, if you're working a $10 an hour job here in Santa Cruz, and there are 2 of you in your family working full time, and you have a child, you're going to qualify for the very low end of this qualification. On the other hand, if you are almost any beginning teacher would qualify. A nurse in our hospital would qualify. So you have that whole range there.
Interesting. And yeah, the Affordable Housing Now, which is the title of this show, and is of course the organization that you folks are all working with. Give us an idea of the kind of work that you're doing, and kind of the solutions that you're really working toward, and really going to create some affordable housing for us here in Santa Cruz. Gretchen?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been doing is looking at how local government is planning to produce some affordable housing, and trying to hold local government accountable, both county and the cities within the county, to their state law obligations, trying to hold them to those.
Of course, yeah.
But also, I think, just to kind of increase the awareness of the issue, and looking at things, other things, not only the housing production side, but also things like vacation rentals that end up taking housing off the market, or ADUs, accessory units that people build on their property, making sure that those are available as actually long-term housing and not vacation rentals. So we're trying to look at all of that and let our local officials know that we are.
Yeah. Let me interrupt just right now and let people know that this is a live call-in show. We're absolutely live here, folks. And you can call 425-8848, extension 630, and ask our panelists any question you might have about affordable housing. I'm sure that there are many questions that people have that need to be answered. So both the city and the county have what they call housing elements that they've gone through in endless hearings and generated these very structured approaches to trying to create some affordable housing in Santa Cruz. Is that really going to work for us in the city of Santa Cruz and or the county of Santa Cruz to actually generate the kind of low and moderate income housing we need?
Well, the housing elements are a part of the city's and the county's general plan, and it's required by state law that they do it, and the housing element is supposed to address how is our county or our city going to provide our quote-unquote fair share of the needed affordable housing, our share statewide of the need. And but it's in some ways been honored in the breach more than in the substance, and particularly, unfortunately, by the county of Santa Cruz, who didn't even file one for a number of years because they felt that the requirements were not suited to our county. And you could argue about that, but anyway, they didn't file it. We actually got quite involved in the last year with the housing elements of the county, of the city of Scotts Valley, and the city of Santa Cruz in particular, partly just to hold them to their policies and say, well, it says here you're going to do such and such for affordable housing. Where are you doing that? And we actually kind of caught the city of Scotts Valley with violating its own policies and trying to exempt a big development from its affordable housing requirement. And we got some people to show up at the meeting and just said, hey, well, what are you doing here? And they backed down.
Are there any of the local municipalities doing a better job than some others? Watsonville, Santa Cruz, Scotts Valley, is anyone really doing, in your opinion, enough to try to create some baseline affordable housing?
The problem is expanding faster than we're addressing it. In fact, it's expanding faster than we're even talking about it.
Right.
Much less actually doing anything to address it. I hate to say that, but.
And we should be just kind of clear too that that all of this housing element discussion and the general plan and land use plans of all these jurisdictions are just plans. So unless developers come forward, unless funding can be found to support development, unless the community kind of gets on board with the development, it doesn't happen. So all the cities and county are required to do is just make it possible. But they're not required to make it happen.
And Tim, you were mentioning, which caught my ear, the politics of it. What are the politics of it here? I mean, what are the politics in the city and the county? I know, for instance, that we are in an election cycle, and every city council candidate that I know of is talking about affordable housing at the top of their agenda, and yet it is so vague in what they really are proposing that the politics kind of wash it out. What's your view of all that?
Well, I think I have a lot of respect for our elected officials, and if you have been to some of the meetings that we've been to where affordable housing is the topic, you are very appreciative of the abuse that they take from the public who don't want anything more built in their backyard.
Well,
they
of
don't
course.
want those people. They always refer to those people living in their community, assuming that that a nurse is not welcome for some reason. So I think the politics of it is, there's sort of two levels. And one of the things that we try to do is to get involved in a way to help our elected officials take those steps. And one way for us to help is to help the staff, is to communicate with the staff. What are you planning? Here are some ideas. What are your ideas? So that when it comes to the elected officials,
Right.
we can be there and say, we support what the staff says. This is a good idea, and you should do that. So that's, I mean, just from a political point of view.
And I know that, and I think it's an excellent proactive strategy is you're taking meetings with the various candidates in Scotts Valley and certainly the city of Santa Cruz to exchange ideas about, what do they think about what's their plan about affordable housing? What would you suggest we do to really create some units? Bruce, you can say anything about that?
Yeah, we decided in Affordable Housing Now that rather than interviewing candidates and evaluating them and then making endorsements of some of them, that rather what we decide to do is build relationships with these people. Some four of these people are going to get elected to the council, and out of the dozen or so that are running, and we want to take the opportunity to not just have them respond to the call for affordable housing with slogans and kind of empty headlines and stuff. We wanted to actually talk to them and develop a relationship with them so that if they get elected, they will remember that we have collected some expertise and some passion about affordable housing, and we can be a resource for them. And the other thing is that if anybody runs for office and claims that they have the solution or they're going to get it fixed by next year, that's foolishness. And so what we are taking is a longer range approach in which there's got to be some pretty substantial work and change to get affordable housing.
Yeah, and as Gretchen said, that a city council or the board of commissioners can set some goals, and but to implement them, you have to have money, and you have to have public support.
Yeah.
And we can help with the public support, we hope, by turning people out and doing forums and events where people learn about the issues. But a lot of it really comes down to the money.
And of course, there are always the strategies about how we'd like to increase our affordable housing stock, particularly in low and moderate income. How do you convince developers that this is something they should be doing? Because they're ultimately people that are going to be building these units, and they're going to have to work with city governments, have to work, and I suspect, with people like yourself who have ideas about how those developments should be energy efficient and some things like that. But how do you interact with developers, or how do you propose to change policy so that there's more response from developers in terms of actually building affordable housing units?
You want to tackle that one?
Sure. Well, okay. You have to work from the premise that working people do not earn enough to pay the cost of their housing, and this has been true for generations. Right. That's why we have the 30-year mortgage was invented in the 20s. That's why we had the GI Bill that put people in homes and so on. So you either regulate the market for the housing with things like price controls and rent controls, or you subsidize the people, like with Section 8 vouchers, or you subsidize the housing when it's built with things like tax credits and things like that. There is no other way than those three things to have working people, regular folks like us, be able to afford the cost of our housing, other than kind of lucking into it or inheriting it. And so, from that standpoint, then what is it that has to be done, or what is going to actually lead to progress? There's got to be a whole bunch of things on a bunch of levels, local, state, and federal. And there's got to be at least one of those three things: subsidy of the people, subsidy of the development, or regulation of the market. And at the moment, we have very little of any of those.
And we can give you one concrete example.
Please,
so that you can see
that's why we got
the
you
way
here.
you would look at it. Yeah, the way you would look at it, the way we would look at development and developers. So there's something called inclusionary.
Of course.
The inclusionary requirements. So if you're going to build a building, and so
Santa
City of Santa
Cruz
Cruz
is 1 in 8,
says, 15% of the units have to be affordable. Well, the developer can also buy out of that in some cases. So they can give the city a pile of money, but that pile of money can't begin to pay for one of those units.
Right.
And in our area, one of the problems is not the building of the unit, it's the land. There's no land, or very little land.
Yeah, I've heard that
So-
figure said that Santa Cruz is 90+% built out already. So
Right, so if a developer wants to build, 15 units or 30 units or whatever it is, what we're trying to say, what we're trying to fight for is that they actually have to build one of those as an affordable unit. They can't pay
Of course,
the in lieu
yeah.
fee for it. And if you multiply that over projects all over our county over a period of time, that would account for quite a number of affordable housing units.
interesting.
And they would spread out.
Yeah.
There'd be some here and some there and some there, and that's the ideal situation.
Yeah.
Although, let me just say a couple things about that.
Please.
One is that 15% is not enough,
Well,
and especially
You won't get any argument
15%.
from me.
15%, if it's designed to create housing for everyone from moderate all the way on down, there will never be housing created that's affordable to the very lowest income. It's just too hard to make that happen financially, to make it pencil out. But the other thing too is, and another way that the governments can help is by just changing zoning to allow for more density, to allow for taller buildings, to allow for, so with the limited land that we have, we can make the best use of it. Ideally on transit corridors, so that it'll be easy for people to get to and fro without having to drive their cars, that sort of thing. But that's a policy that hasn't happened much in the county, at least, in the unincorporated area. And hopefully there's some plans to change that.
In the city, they're talking about, I'm sure you're aware, the Soquel Avenue Corridor Plan, which proposes to, I think, widen Soquel, but also raise the
Actually,
height
4
limitation.
streets, yeah.
Raise the height
Soquel.
limitation to 77 feet. So you're talking about some considerable variances in your height limitation.
Yeah, they're actually talking about 4 main streets in Santa Cruz:
Oh, okay.
Soquel, Water, Mission, and Ocean.
The only one I was familiar with that I've talked to neighbors about.
Yeah, because there was a project,
Right,
that kind of fit in.
They're extremely concerned about height limitation of 77 feet, but as Gretchen points out, if you're going to create the opportunity for truly low and moderate income housing, then it's going to have to, it not necessarily can go out, it's got to go up.
Well, the intensification issue is huge right now, and neighborhoods all over the city are
Yeah,
hot.
oh, of course.
They're in flames about it, and higher density, more height, things like that. And so even though sort of the urban planning theory is good, that you concentrate higher density in larger buildings near the transportation and, all get those synergies of what a city ought to work like.
Sure.
The neighbors near those potential sites, they just feel like it's one more case where development's being done to them.
Of course.
And so you're going to build a 77-foot high building that means that the neighbors that live next to it are never going to be able to grow vegetables in their garden again because of the shade that your building's going to cast. They are actually experiencing a loss, And you could say, well, the public good of the more housing should make up for that loss. Well, if it's not affordable, then I say, no, actually that is
Of
no
course,
gain for
yeah.
us. So it's got to be affordable if it's going to be taller and denser. And then the second thing is we could go at the planning process differently. And I'm not going to give my I have a proposal, but it's too long to talk about today. But basically the
Well, you
idea
can
is,
synopsize this for it if you
yeah,
like. We have a couple of minutes.
let the neighborhood plan it first before the capitalist investor comes along and decides what they want to do to make money.
Right.
And we could have much more broad-based, neighborhood-based community planning in Santa Cruz if our political leadership would accept it. We could do that, and the people of Santa Cruz are smart and creative and committed and have social values that if they had a say in how affordable housing were added to their neighborhood, you might get a lot higher acceptability of it. But we're so far, the planning approval process today creates just an oppositional, conflictual
And I will
situation.
tell you from experience, out walking, this is an election cycle, and so I will say I've been talking to a lot of neighbors. That's precisely what they're saying. They're saying, we went to the Planning Commission. We talked to them about this. When this development was being proposed, we said, it's going to impact traffic impact and parking, and how about this and that and the other thing? And they didn't feel like they were being heard. Yeah. And so when that advisory opinion is later then it takes to council, and council has another hearing, and they go to council and say, listen, we talked to the Planning Commission, and now we're talking to you. They don't feel like they're being heard.
And it's gone too far at that point, because at that point, your owner or your investor has already put a bunch of money into thinking about design. They probably put some money down to get control of the land. You know, they have loans or something. They've spent money on their consultants to get their permit application prepared to give to the city. So they've already got a picture, and they're not going to be able to, with that kind of sunk cost, change it very much. It's very hard to change it once you're that far down the line, at the point where the public hears about it and realizes what's going to happen in their neighborhood. So to me, the planning process sets us up for those kind of conflicts.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we were talking a lot about the city of Santa Cruz. Of course, we're broadcasting from the city of Santa Cruz. I'm a city of Santa Cruz resident, as you are, Bruce. But Affordable Housing Now is looking for affordable housing solutions all over the county. So how does that broaden your approach in terms of the kinds of things that you are considering and examining and thinking about?
Well, one of the things is to try to be consistent and to try to get the different entities to have similar policies. And I'd like to turn the corridor plan around a little bit and go back to the people again, because this is one of the arguments that we often hear. We go to a hearing, and there's a crowd there that doesn't want it. Whatever it is, they don't want it. You know, it's that we don't want anything. We don't want anything new. We don't want our neighborhood to change.
What's the not in my backyard lobby, which is very strong everywhere, but particularly so in Santa Cruz.
And while Bruce is right, if you build it up from the ground, you might be able to avoid some of that. But still, what we get is, that's a great idea. I'm all for affordable housing. I think affordable housing is wonderful. We need affordable housing. I just don't want it here. Go build it over there. Well, so the people in Santa Cruz say, well, build it up where I live in Boulder Creek. And the people in
or Live Oak, or
somewhere else, anywhere but here. So let me just turn that argument around for you for a minute. See, one of our working principles is that what we're fighting for is housing for the people that are here. We're not fighting for development.
And I did see that on our website.
Yeah, we're not fighting for development for people that are going to move over here and commute from Silicon Valley. We're here to fight for what's here, our people, the people who are already vested in our community. So just turn it around. Let's suppose so you get elected and you say, well, I got this great idea. I got elected because people don't want any of these corridor developments. They don't want any of these buildings on Soquel Avenue. So, you know what? I know that, right now, the nurse that's going to take care of you in the hospital doesn't live in Santa Cruz. That nurse can't afford to live in Santa Cruz. That nurse is commuting from Watsonville, hopefully, but in many cases from Salinas. So she's got a child at home. She leaves early in the morning. She's worried about her child. If her child's sick, she can't run home and take care of the child. That's who you've got taking care of you. So you get a brilliant idea and you say, well, I'm going to go with the people and we're not going to have any of this development. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make an ordinance that says we're not going to have any hospitals. We don't want any hospitals because these people are coming in, these employees are crowding up our highways. We're not going to have any hospitals down here. All the hospitals have to move to Salinas and Watsonville.
Because that's where the people are living.
Because we don't want them driving through our neighborhood, clogging up our roads.
There you go.
Now, that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But that's the same thing that you're actually saying when somebody goes to a meeting and says, I don't want a third floor on that building for some affordable housing person, that person is your nurse. She's or he is part of your community. You want to look at this. What we're trying to do is to say, look, people, think this through. Commit yourself to solving this problem. Everyone here is part of the solution.
I like that.
So be part of it. Don't push it off onto somebody else. So in a regional sense, it's going to take everyone working together.
And let me make sure that everybody, Affordable Housing Now, is it affordablehousingnow.org? Is that the?
Yes.
Okay. Look at their website, really get, familiarize yourself with, they have 4 principles on there that I think really are worth looking at as a template when you're examining this issue for yourselves. But, and I wanted to make sure, Bruce, you had something to say?
No, I think Tim covered it.
Well, I was going to ask Gretchen now, with the CRLA, you deal with a lot of landlord-tenant, land use things of that nature. To what degree is your involvement with affordable housing now either guided by that or impact, your work with the CRLA?
Well, what I'm really trying to do in affordable housing now is constantly remind everybody about the people at the very lowest end of the ladder. The people, the gardeners, the restaurant workers, the hotel workers, the nurses' aides, the in-home care workers. Those people, when we talk about nurses, it's a terrible thing that nurses can't live in our community. But imagine what it is if you are a janitor, and you're forced to live in a house with two other families.
Right.
And, maybe you have 18 people living in 2 bedrooms.
Right.
That's how people are living.
Right.
The people who do live here, who are low income, that's how they're living, or in their cars, or they're homeless.
And I think it transcends, I was telling Tim before the show started, it transcends even to the moderate income. I have a friend that lives near me who works for the City of Santa Cruz Sanitation Department. There are 35 people in his department. Of those 35 folks, only 7 live in the City of Santa Cruz. None of them are homeowners. So that is the landscape for even moderate income folks, and that's the challenge. That's the steep bar we have to try to get over if we're going to really create some affordable housing. I know that you all read with interest the article in the Sentinel today about the rental crisis. I'm not sure it was a surprise to any of us, nor to a lot of people in Santa Cruz, but nevertheless, it was John D. Gums that wrote that article. Very nice. Thank you, John D. And I know that there is, one of your principles does reference rentals, so tell us something about that.
Well, in most advanced industrialized countries, when a market is going bad, they regulate it. And so when a housing market has very little vacancy, so there's very little choice, and when rents are escalating at a very rapid rate, which both of those things are what we have here, then usually a housing crisis is declared and they will come in and regulate that market. It's very common, and even in the US we regulate lots of markets to keep them within the bounds that make them work for society. And so rent control or rent stabilization is a natural thing to think about here. And lots of communities around the state and in other states are now discussing it or passing it. And that was a big issue for me and a lot of other people in Santa Cruz in the 70s and early 80s. We came within 78 votes of passing rent control back then, and we tried again. We had it on about 3 different times. The thing is, it's challenging because landlords are better at fighting rent control, fighting against it, than tenants are able to get organized and fight for it. So it's an uneven playing field politically. But it's a modest market regulation that sure makes a lot of sense. So there are people calling for it. And what should go along with regulating rents is increased protections against arbitrary evictions of tenants, because that's another thing that's happening a lot. Whether either of those 2 battles is early, comes up in Santa Cruz soon, I don't know, actually, because at the moment, for example, our group is more focused on the loss of rental housing by conversion to vacation rentals. That's such an immediate thing, and that affects rent levels and vacancy rate very directly.
It reduces your rental stock.
Yeah, so lower vacancy rate, and it's competition for the rent levels, and so it's pushing up rents. And so that's a little bit more immediate and potentially a little more addressable if our elected officials are willing to address it.
And I think there will be some candidates who do, in fact. I can tell you for sure that there are. But it's particularly relevant to Santa Cruz, where we are 50% renters.
Over 50%.
In the county, it's something in the neighborhood of 26 or 7 or 8%. But nevertheless, it is. We are a city of renters. And so politically, do you think it's difficult for elected officials or candidates, for instance, to speak out and get some traction on rent stabilization, rent control, because landlords are powerful politically in Santa Cruz?
Well, they're organized and powerful, but also, I don't know if this happened to you when you declared, but almost every city council candidate is asked by an apartment owner association to pledge themselves to be against rent control.
Well, they haven't asked me yet, but maybe they know what my answers are going to
But the key thing is that they're capable of being organized.
Yeah.
So if I, Bruce Van Allen, known for past work as a tenant organizer in rent control, talk to the paper and say, we need rent control again, this is almost literally true. There will be a meeting tonight of landlords with money on the table saying, we got to fight this. And then some other landlords will raise their rents next month if they hear us talking about it. So it's a very, like I say, very uneven playing field.
And Tim, your views on rent stabilization, rent control as it impacts our stock of affordable housing?
I'm not always in agreement with Bruce's
Say it ain't so.
on rent control. Well, we've been following it in a number of communities. Mountain View, of course, has one on the ballot.
It does. Okay.
And there, I mean, it's even worse there, obviously. I think their rent doubled in 1 year.
Is that right?
So there are a number of quite a few communities in the Bay Area who do have rent stabilization, who do have, but most of them, like San Jose has one, but most of them have a fairly high percentage each year.
That they're allowed to raise the rent.
Yeah. Hi, you're on community television with the Affordable Housing Now, folks. You have a question?
Yes, this is John Maurer. I'm calling to ask about, you guys ever talked about crime, or, because I know that is a big issue with some people is crime, and the crime that might go up. That's the question.
Okay, thanks, John. So is that a NIMBY pushback? Is it they have more density, they're going to have more crime? Is that something, is the public safety element to it at all?
I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that view at all.
Okay.
I think that's a bias against low-income people. It's racism. I'm sorry, caller, but I don't think there's anything that says that if you build affordable housing for people that live and work in your community, that you're going to get more crime from it.
I think it's really a question of good management of it, particularly if it's a rental property, and you have really good management, then you'll have very little crime.
And I know that it is a question that comes up. I remember going to the Planning Commission hearings here when they were thinking about building on Ocean Street and right Roosevelt Terrace and that. And they were talking about, well, that's going to be, a managed residential community. Is it going to fall away? The management's not going to be paying attention to that, and all of a sudden, it becomes a place where crime does rise. So it's a concern, and I do agree with Bruce's views on this. But I have heard people in Planning Commission meetings make that reference. So whether we agree with it or not, maybe it's an issue for some folks. Your views on rent stabilization and rent control, Raketchan?
Well, I cannot take a position on that on behalf of my organization, but I will tell you that on a personal level, I do think rents are just out of hand, and it's time to do something about it. I want to just add a sort of an extra wrinkle to this too.
Please.
One of the things that Bruce talked about as a possible solution is subsidizing individuals so that they can go out and lower income people can go out and rent something where the rent's still high, but they have a government subsidy, some kind of help to pay for that. And one of the ones everybody's familiar with is Section 8.
Of course.
And I'll tell you that in addition to all the other issues we've described, there's a terrible problem with landlords' unwillingness to accept Section 8 vouchers now. So there's actually a separate group from ours that's working on that problem, trying to come up with ways to market the program to landlords and so forth. But even people who have subsidies are losing them because they can't find a place to rent within the time that's allotted to them.
Yeah, I know that was it 2 or 3 years ago, Ken Cole, who was the executive director of the Housing Authority here, said there were 10,000 applications for Section 8 housing that were not even being reviewed because there were no applications, people to review them, and there were no spots for them. So, it's one of those things that in a landlord pushback, I was working with a group that was housing local veterans. And one of the things that we had was a component of our outreach that we went out to landlords and tried to convince them that these are people that they should be willing to rent to. But unfortunately, with Section 8, because the rents are so high, the landlords see they can rent at market value, market rate or above. So they're not really willing to accept housing at housing. Housing vouchers puts that much more pressure on our rental stock.
Right.
Ironically, though, because housing vouchers actually give a more assured stream of rent income to them.
Well, and convince a landlord of that they have to kind of then lay over another layer of bureaucracy if they have to deal with HUD, and they don't want to do that.
Well, they have, their unit has to pass an inspection.
Yeah.
Once a year.
So it has to
Perish
be
the thought,
it's
habitable.
Yeah, it just has
And-
the doors have to lock, stuff like that.
And they do have to give more notice to their tenants. If they want to terminate a tenancy, they have to give 90 days rather than the usual 30 or 60. But really, other than that, it's all gain for landlords. They are guaranteed the rent every month. If the tenant doesn't pay, the housing authority makes up the difference.
And if there's a problem with the tenant, there's an intermediary for them.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's, I mean, for a landlord, it's it's an ideal situation.
So in your overall strategy as affordable housing now, you're working in the entire county, so naturally you're going to have to consider university growth and the influx of new students and the units that they're going to have to develop to house their own student population. How does affordable housing now look at that, and is there something that you would suggest policy-wise to the university to increase their mental units?
Oh, well, we of course would love to see the university build more housing, but we also know the complications for the university in doing that. And I thought that was a little, that Johnny's article today tried to imply that our housing problem is the university. And
well, she's not the first one to make that implication.
Yeah, and that's sort of unfortunately, that's an often stated community view. But the more you look into it, the more you realize how much the university actually has done. And UCSC has the highest percentage of students on campus of any UC school. But being realistic, again, the problem in our area is land, and the university has land. But so does Cabrillo College. Cabrillo College can build housing for their faculty. The school districts have land. They could, they could build housing on the school district land. I mean, you have to find land, and then you have to find the money to build something on it. So all affordable housing is subsidized, and the land is the real key.
And these are fundamental policy changes that have to take place within each one of these institutions in order for them to be able to do that?
For UC, there are many other things about the cost of a unit has to be borne by what's the formula?
It's a statewide formula, though. It isn't even just local to this campus. So,
it would have to be something done at the chancellor level in order to change that. And affordable housing now is not, we're not quite ready to take that one on.
So, but you have taken on a number of very important issues in terms of actually creating affordable housing and are suggesting some plans. Where are you going as you move forward as an organization and certainly have much more influence, I would hope, on the policymakers and the decision makers to see that some of these suggestions are implemented so we can actually generate some affordable housing units?
Well, right now, as Bruce said, our focus right now is on vacation rentals, because that's very tangible. It's something that is is being discussed, and both the city of Santa Cruz and the county are about to make decisions on vacation rentals. And then I think after that, the other thing that we would maybe in the long term is the funding. Where can we lobby our state legislators to get more funding? I think all of us are involved in the election right now. Maybe there'll be some federal money coming if we get the right person in there.
Well, we were talking.
But even locally, there are things like where does the money go? Like for instance, for a vacation rental. Right now, the TOT tax goes right into the city to. Some of it goes toward advertising to get more people to come visit.
Does the Conference of Visitors Bureau use some of that money to
So
promote
everybody's
the city?
fighting for a piece of the pie. But if you're going to have a vacation rental, which we don't want to see any, but if you do, why can't some of that money go to solve
affordable housing?
Affordable housing, because it's a problem for affordable housing. So why can't it be part of the solution? Same thing with real estate. Our real estate prices are going crazy. So a transfer tax, real estate transfer tax. have a real estate transfer tax. That's very
Well,
common in lots of communities, and that's how they fund their affordable housing.
And I'll be talking to you more about that on Tuesday, but I won't mention that now.
The other thing there is something
Please,
else
Jim,
happening
please,
though,
Bruce.
which is there's been more awareness of the degree of the crisis in affordable housing in the last year or so around the county, and a number of housing groups just got together about 8 weeks ago to talk about how to raise the awareness and the communication and the coordination among all the different groups working on from unhoused homelessness issues all the way to the density question and the subsidies and the funding and everything. And there's a tentative idea, a model that we learned of from another community to continue to draw more attention to the question is an idea called Affordable Housing Week. And so we're just right now beginning to put some things in place for Affordable Housing Week this fall in Santa Cruz. So far, the main thing we know of is that on October 13th, which is a Thursday, there's going to be a presentation by a couple of faculty from UCSC who have been studying the rental housing market. They're the same ones that studied the low-wage workers of the county and released their results about 1.5 years ago. And they have done a survey this spring of a couple low-income neighborhoods in Santa Cruz of the renters and asking them about their conditions. And they are going to announce their findings on October 13th. And so given that they've set that date, now the other groups, the housing groups, are starting to think, okay, let's make a week out of that. And maybe one would be a bus tour of existing affordable housing so people can kind of get past the stereotype of what it looks like or what the neighborhood's like. The Santa Cruz Tenant Organizing Committee, which I'm a member of and an organizer in, we are talking about putting on a tenants' rights forum.
Wonderful.
And with probably in connection with some other local community groups. And so now we're thinking, okay, we'll do it that week.
Right.
So that's another thing that people can look forward to is Affordable Housing Week, most likely to be in about the second week of October this fall.
But on a more practical level, funding-wise, are you making suggestions to local municipalities or the county about new funding streams? For instance, as you know, Bruce, from being a mayor in the past, the city has a general fund, which at this point is $70 million or so. But they've got a larger fund, which includes all their capital gains long-term projects, which is about $233 million. In the absence now of a redevelopment agency, is there any way to be able to leverage any of those funds into affordable housing funds?
It'd be tough to get much out of it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, city budget is tight in all areas, not just housing, because of the recession and the cutbacks that have been happening for a long time. What I would be more interested in for a city policy, and this could be Santa Cruz or Watsonville, maybe even Capitola, and I could imagine it in the county, but I'm not sure what the legal setup is the transfer tax idea. If the city put in a real estate transfer tax, which basically takes, it's paid when title to property is transferred from one, from the seller to the buyer. If it were even a small, tiny amount, like 1% of the sale price. So a house going for, what's the median now is 800,000 or something like that?
It's about that, yeah.
Okay, so
790
there's a bunch of those sales every year.
Yeah.
1% of 800,000 is $8,000. That actually starts to be from one transaction.
Right.
And yet that 1% would not be felt very significantly by someone paying $800,000 for a house. So that could be a very fair way, and if it applies to all transactions, it actually starts to generate serious money. And that would be a local source of money, which could then be used to match against state and federal money, because that's usually a requirement to get that money if it ever shows up.
There was also a suggestion that we were talking earlier about the inclusionary rule and how developers can opt out by paying into a fund. So that fund is real money somewhere. Is there a possibility of combining some of those funds, either city or county, and having that a fund to try to generate some affordable housing? Because there is money there.
That's the theory. The amount is small, and so again, the theory is either you use it for something that doesn't take a lot of money, like maybe make a fund, a revolving fund for first and last deposits for low-income tenants, or something like that. That could actually do some benefit from a small amount of money. The other thing with a small amount of money is you say, this is our city's share, and we want to leverage it. We're showing our city's commitment with this $1 million, and so now we want $10 million from the state and $40 million from the feds. And they say, yeah, okay, we see your city is stepping up. with your own money, so we'll make you that grant. I wish those state and federal programs were there, though. They're not right now.
Well, we were talking earlier about the governor's proposing to spend $400 million on housing and fast track some of the development. But you were mentioning that that's really not very much money to build any kind of affordable housing, particularly in view of the number of units we need.
Well, there's two parts of that. One is the $400 million is a lot of money, but it's dedicated to some particular groups with really strong needs, particularly people with mental health issues and their needs for housing. So that money isn't general, and it's not nearly enough to address the state's affordable housing needs. And so it's not a
Well, there's also money that the governor is proposing to spend $2 billion to house the homeless folks who have mental or behavioral health disabilities. So that's also a possibility to have some housing built for them. But it is definitely, you're right, it's a designated one-time fund, so it just doesn't really address the problem in the long term.
It's not enough money, and it also doesn't. It only requires about 5% inclusionary.
I mean,
So
the
our
other piece of this,
inclusionary is better than that.
That's the other. What Brown has done is say, I won't veto that money for affordable housing, provided that the legislature agrees with me on this what's called by right development process.
Exactly.
And by right, that means that if you locate the units and you have a very small percentage affordable, way less than we require locally, but if it's near transportation, you get you just get to build it without having the usual process.
Which doesn't make the grassroots organizations who work against the kind of developments that don't have any affordable housing, don't have inclusionary unit rules with them. It makes them difficult for them to have any say about that, because the streamlined process jams it right through. So they're not very happy about that.
No, and it means basically less of an affordable housing requirement than we currently have. So it's going to be the exact nightmare that the neighborhoods that are concerned about the corridor plan are fearful of.
So now, how are we moving forward with affordable housing now? You folks have done so much good work, and as the conversations reflected tonight, there are just so many different elements. And there's the legislative landscape and the funding streams and the NIMBY problem, and where we can build and how we can build. Are you hopeful that we're really going to be able to get some traction on this? Is it going to take a new council in Santa Cruz? Is it going to take a new policy developed by the county? What do we need to do to put pressure on elected officials? This is, again, the political aspect of this. That we need, you need to actually get units built that are for low and moderate income folks.
So, well, one thing that I think is hopefully a kind of bright spot here is that the county, in its last housing element, did develop some new policies that will require some rezoning, kind of intensification, opportunity for more density, both for employment-related enterprises and also housing. And so I think we want to really watch that closely and see how that develops. And they've already kind of, at least in a conceptual way, kind of plotted out where this is going to happen. So I say it's hopeful because I think it does create some real opportunity. It's a real change from where the road the county's been on for the last 30 years. So,
which is pretty much a road to nowhere for a while.
Pretty much a road to nowhere. The county had to be sued in order to actually adopt a housing element. So they had to be ordered to do it. So
they didn't do it just because it was the right thing to do.
The right thing to do.
What a shock. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
But I do think there's been somewhat of a sea change on the board, and I hope that's true, and I think there may be it's a good opportunity for pressure to be put on the county too if it doesn't follow through on the promises that it's made.
Bruce, your view on the shifting political landscape, is there some hope on the horizon?
Well, I do politics because I think it can make a difference.
Yeah.
So,
well, you yourself have made a difference, and I think people should appreciate that.
One hopes. But I would say right now, similarly as with climate change, as I said earlier, the problem is actually getting worse at a faster rate than we're even paying attention and trying to address it. And I don't see affordability in housing really being in a much better place without federal subsidies for housing or federal market regulation or something like that. And certainly a state the size of California ought to also be playing a much stronger role. I mean, I just want to say, when people all over this state with the 6th biggest economy in the world are suffering over housing costs, that means that our government is not doing its job. That's the only way to see that.
Right.
That's what happens. That government is there to help the markets work, theoretically, in our system. Well, it's sure failing right now. So I say that's irresponsible. That's lack of leadership. And I'm not saying they're all bad people. They're
No,
not.
of course
But
not.
there's a kind of an abdication of responsibility there, in my view. So we're not going to solve it in the local level only. It's going to have to be people making the demand and rising up and saying we got to be creative, we got to push more, and it's got to work its way all the way up to the top.
It's seemingly not as much a bad policy as it is a lack of policy at all. That there is no policy that's generated that really is going to lay the foundation for building affordable housing.
Well, the policy is to, excuse me for saying, but the policy is to put the priorities of investors and property owners first and everybody else second. I mean, that's what it is. I'm sorry to say that, in those terms maybe, but actually
Tim,
I'm not sorry to
comments
say it.
about the political landscape here?
Well,
You're a resident politician.
I would
on the
say, our organization, we're optimistic. Things are happening.
Good.
We see politicians at all levels acknowledging the problem,
Yeah.
and that's the first step.
Right.
Well, and I will say that people are acknowledging your group as players in this landscape of how we're going to generate affordable housing, and that's important, I think, for some recognition. Oftentimes, if you don't get a seat at the table, you really don't get the kind of say you need in order to change a policy. And so that's the importance, really, of a group like Affordable Housing Now, and it's the importance of really having a show like this to let people get at least some idea of what the challenges are. I think you're laying it out, pretty well. But we have 2 or 3, 4 minutes left. Any final thoughts for our audience about all this really great work you're doing? And we are delighted to have had you here tonight. We appreciate it.
Well, just to continue that last thought, this group, Affordable Housing Now, it's been around about 1.5 years, something like that. And we have been very consciously not trying to have one correct line or one policy that we all have to, agree to and salute. But we have some variation in where we're coming from, what our histories are, what our values are, what we're trying to accomplish. But there's a recognition that the nature of the housing problem is big and manifold, and it needs everybody, all hands on deck to address it. And so we're happy to have some variation in views within our group. And I think that's the way you succeed in a community is to.
And it is, although it is a show about affordable housing now, that's my view as well, is you really need to have an integrated approach. There have to be several different approaches you're going to use if you're actually going to generate some affordable housing, particularly in the number of units we need. Gretchen, a few final thoughts for us as we go on?
Yeah, in 1948, the UN declared housing as a fundamental right, and I think that it is achievable, but it's really about the will, the political will to do it, and making the money there to bring it about.
Tim, some final thoughts for our audience?
Well, what we like to say is every unit counts, and we'll fight for every unit that we can, anywhere we can. And we certainly appreciate you having us on tonight so that we can help spread the word.
Yeah. Well, as I said at the top of the show, everybody's talking about affordable housing. And it would be helpful if people had ideas, as you've given them this evening, about how they can really engage in this, in this critical situation, this dire circumstance that we're experiencing, and maybe offer some ideas of their own. And that is just as true for the ordinary citizen in the street as it is for people who are elected and holding office now and who may be holding it in the future. But again, it's been terrific having you here. I think we maybe have another couple of minutes, so we go around for another 30 seconds of tell the audience what you think about affordable housing.
Well, let me mention actually this tenant organizing group.
Please, there you go.
This came
You're
about.
bailing me out here for the last 2 minutes.
A few people. I was one of a group of people that did a presentation to a UCSC audience last December about housing issues, and we broke into discussion groups after that, and one group was talking about rental issues, and so some of us decided to do some background on what's the current state of tenant protections and rent stabilization around the state. And so we started meeting and started forming a group and realized that there is kind of an absence right now in the community of a tenant advocacy group. And so we want to create a tenant association or a tenant union in Santa Cruz, not just city, but in Santa Cruz region. And so we're the tenant organizing committee, and we're kind of just getting started.
Well, thank you for that work and for the work of Affordable Housing Now. Bruce Van Allen, a pleasure to see you, and thank you for creating my buttons for my campaign. Gretchen Regenhart, nice to see you. Look forward to seeing you again very soon, hopefully at the next Project Columbus Connect. We really appreciate the CRLA and the good work that you do for us. And Tim, a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for your political observations and all the good work you're doing for Affordable Housing Now. And I'm sure that I'll be seeing you very soon and discussing more options and plans about how we can really create some affordable housing in Santa Cruz. Thank you again for looking into this edition of Voice from the Village. I've been Steve Plaich, and join us in another couple of weeks. We'll be talking about another one of the critical issues that's facing our community, and we'll have some other guests in and see if we can give you some information about how you can engage in the community. Again, Voice from the Village, Steve Plaich, thank you, and we'll see you next time.